Hello, my name is Matthew Sear, and this is my bookmark application that I created for my final project for Flatiron School. The application is actually two applications, the front end built on React and Redux, and the back end built on Ruby on Rails. And I'm just going to give you a quick tour through the application before I break into some of the code. But the home page greets you. Encourages you to navigate to one of the options above to start making folders or bookmarks. I've populated the database on the back end with some seed data, so we'll look at my folders first to see what loads when we go there. And there's a couple of different folders, each of which you can delete from this list or click on the link to view the bookmarks within, and it tells you how many bookmarks there are, as well as gives you a brief description about what types of bookmarks are there. So if we go to the games ones, we'll see that the same information is at the top, and then there's the actual list of bookmarks to the right here. And if you click on the link, it'll open up in a new page so that you can just go back to the list unimpeded. And from here we can add a new bookmark. So we'll just add the official Magic the Gathering page. Hopefully we'll get redirected if not. Yeah, cool. And you can see once we add the bookmark, it loads immediately over here in the list to the right and updates the number of bookmarks within the folder. And if we go back to my folders, we'll see that information there as well. And if we go to our all bookmarks list, it will show that bookmark in the list as well. So let's go back here and we'll delete this bookmark. Again, the number updates. It's no longer there whenever we return to it. And if we go to the all bookmarks list, it's no longer there either. We can also delete links from this all bookmarks list so that if we would then go back to our folder, it's not there either. So it's kind of all pulling from the same data and reusing these same components from React to list things out depending on which view you go to. We can create a new folder as well. And when we go to our folders list, it'll be there. It'll show there are 0 bookmarks, and just as we did before, we can add another one. Yay. So let's actually look at some of the code that goes into making this work. We'll start with the back end. So compared to some of the previous projects I've done with Rails, not a lot happens on this side as it pertains to rendering the data on the front end, aside from providing the necessary JSON data to the React components in order to display to the user. The way that this is broken down is we have 2 controllers that are namespaced under this API v1 path. And if we look at the bookmarks, and well, we'll look at the folders controller first. It'll have all the same sort of REST route methods that you would expect: index, create, show, destroy. And you'll notice that instead of rendering a view, it renders the JSON, and then the JSON can then be used on the front end to render the data contained within the response. So we'll look at that more closely when we get to the front end. But the bookmarks controller is pretty similar. Allows you to do a lot of the same things. If we look at the way that the routes are set up, we have a namespace so that the API and v1 folders are taken into consideration, and then it renders the folders, and then the bookmarks are actually within the folders, so there's those nested routes. And then I added a special all bookmarks path as well, so whenever you go to the root/bookmarks, it routes to that controller action of all bookmarks and displays it as such. And then I also mentioned that there was some seed data that I set up, so you can look and see the fields associated with tables in our database. and then the seed data creates those so that I can just show those as an example. So other than that, not really much else is happening on the back end. There are some serializers which indicate what we want to return within the JSON response that we get once we make our request. So the bookmark one here, we have the same relationship that we have in the model belongs to the folder, and it returns all of the information associated with that. Same thing with the folder. It has many bookmarks just like the folder model does, and returns these attributes as well. And because we have that relationship set up that way, whenever we request a folder, we can get the bookmarks within. It's all part of the same response. So other than that, I don't think that there's anything major that needs to be looked at on the back end. If we move over to the front end, we'll see that in our source folder here we have the main app component, and this is where everything is rendered initially, or mounted initially, all these other components. So there's this navbar component which has links to some of the actions and views that we want to see that actually do some things, and there's these static home and about components that are just stateless components. They don't have anything but the information contained within them, so it's not dynamically rendering any data. So the main things that are being rendered whenever we look at the app component here are the folders container, which contains in it the paths to the various actions related to folders. So creating a new folder renders this input component, and looking at a particular folder renders the folder component with the appropriate props passed in to identify that specific folder, and a folders path that shows a list of all the folders. Once this component mounts, it initiates this fetch folders action, which we have as a result of importing it from the path within our hierarchy there, and then it connects to this container component so that we can interact with it. And that's done through Redux, which is something I neglected to mention on this main app page here, or rather the index page. So in the index page we have the setup for everything related to Redux, in which we create the store and specify our reducer, which is what is going to be updating and returning our state. And then it also incorporates this Redux Thunk middleware, which allows us to dispatch asynchronous actions within, or dispatch asynchronous requests within our actions, which I'll go into in a little bit. But this mounts the main app component, and then it's also wrapped in our store so that we can access the values that are kept within that for our state. So the states are not handled necessarily on an individual component basis, but all components that need or want access to the state can have that through the Redux store. So if we go back to the folders container, we have, like I said, the fetch folders action that we're importing that happens whenever the component mounts, and then we also have the state, which is mapped to props, so that we can access that as well, and that just returns our folders, list of folders that we have from this fetch. So basically what happens is whenever the fetch folder action is called upon, it returns this dispatch function, which is where we're actually performing our asynchronous requests. Typically in React you wouldn't be able to make an asynchronous request because it's expecting an immediate response, but the Redux middleware allows us to do this and then wait for a response from our backend API. And you can see here we're requesting from the server with the namespace API v1 and then folders, and it is going to get a response that is parsed into JSON, and then with that JSON data we are going to dispatch the type of request that we want, or the type of action, and the payload that we're going to get from that. So if we then go look at our folder reducer, where this is going, it takes in the initial state and the action that we're sending along, and the action type in this case is fetch folders, so it's going to return the folders as the action.payload. So once that happens, and we make that request on our folders, it then populates this list right here. And if we go and look at our Redux tools, we can see that the state contains this list of folders here. So that state is created from the reducer. It returns the state with all the folders as the payload. And once the state is updated, that tells our component that it needs to re-render because it has new information to populate. And so the same sorts of things happen whenever we're posting data. Like, so for example, if we wanted to add a new folder like we did before, on our forum, we're typing in all of that information. It updates the state every time a new keystroke is made. So once the input field of any, or the input of any of the fields changes, it updates the state. And then once the user actually goes to submit the form to create the folder, it prevents the default redirect from submitting. It has access to this add folder action from the props, which is, we can see in the folder component, it passes down the props to the folder input component based on this route. And well, actually the folder input is imported from the add folder action is imported within the folder input component, but the component is loaded because of the folder container passing that into this route. So within the folder input component, then the props are created because we're exporting and connecting this add folder to that export there. So in any case, once the folder is added, it takes in the state as an argument. And if we go to our add folder action, we see that it's taking in this data and then again returning this dispatch function to fetch the API and post the data to it. Once again, it's going to get a response back, parse it into JSON, and then with the data contained within, it's going to update the Redux store with this dispatch function. And whenever we go into the reducer, it's taking that add folder type and then using the payload to return the updated state associated with the folders there. And that's going to cause our component to update again, and yeah, that's why we're able to look back at our folders list after we add a new folder and see that that one's been added. So it works much the same with the bookmarks and bookmark input, as well as deleting folders and bookmarks. You can see the different actions associated with our reducer here, and they're all connected with the appropriate components as needed depending on which page you're on. So yeah, the application is fairly simple in what it does on the front end, but there's a lot that goes into it on the back end because of the different well, let me rephrase. So there's a lot going on within the behind the scenes aspects of the application, both on the front end and the back end, because of managing the state on the front end and all of the information that the user is currently entering, and then everything that's sent then to the back end to be updated on the front end, again, to re-render what the user is trying to view. So it's interesting to see how these applications actually work, and to imagine how much structure and design considerations need to be made for larger scale applications. But this demonstrates the manner in which you can use React and Rails in tandem as a front end and back end respectively to create an application like this that updates without reloading the entire page and therefore hammering your server with unnecessary requests for things that can just be updated in components, which is the great thing about React, because you can reuse a lot of these things and just have a specific component update as opposed to an entire page. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video.